cut out a little bit there for a moment. I'll explain what just happened. Sometimes the news comes to you when you're here at the UN Climate Conference. We were just sitting around waiting while you guys were watching the video. I was chatting with our next guest, Cyrie Sendashonga, who's going to talk about forests and REDD, when an Indigenous rights protest about REDD came right by us. So we cut straight to it. Indigenous people feel that this REDD program that's being discussed here about forests is a threat to their rights, and they're being very vocal about that. So we're going to get Cyrie Sendashonga's thoughts on that in a moment. But first, I want us to just meet Cyrie. You're from Rwanda. You live and work in Cameroon now, and you work for the Center for International Forestry Research. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to this position?
Well, thank you for inviting me to the program. So as you said, I am originally from Rwanda. That's where I was born, where I grew up. And actually, my parents were farmers. So I grew up very much in the countryside, looking at nature, animals. In those days, Rwanda was not, at least when I was a kid, not as overpopulated as it is now. So there was still quite a lot of green spaces around. And very early on, I actually wanted to do things that relate to nature without very much knowing what exactly it was going to be. So when I went to university, I studied biology. At one point, I think I wanted to work with national parks, to study animals and things like that. That didn't happen to be the case. I went, yes, for biology, but more on the molecular biology side. So then from there,
Can I just break in and ask you, how did you manage to get to university? I think for a lot of Americans and Westerners out there, it's interesting to hear how someone who doesn't have a lot of access to education can make that leap.
Well, that's a very good question. In the 60s, soon after the independence in most African countries, education was seen as a high priority. Well, it still is nowadays, except things have slightly changed in the way people can afford education. In those days, it was free. Every kid was encouraged to go to school. So I went to elementary school, primary school as it's called there. After the first 6 years, there was a national exam, and those kids who would pass the exam would go to secondary school. It was still free. The state would pay for everything. When you finish high school, 6 years of secondary education, you go to university. And we had a scholarship, so it was kind of free. So that's how I moved all the way to higher education. Right.
And then what happened after that? How did you end up in Cameroon?
Cameroon is actually a recent history for me because I've been there just for almost 4 years. I moved there at the beginning of 2006. But before that, I went to work for the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. And I was involved I joined UNEP at the time when the world was preparing for the famous Earth Summit held in Rio in 1992. And they were negotiating the Convention on Biological Diversity, even the one we are talking about today, climate change. And that's how I happened to enter this environment movement at that particular juncture. And it was really like a coincidence to open me to the wider problems of the wider world. And I have been in that since then.
Well, you're the right person to talk to about these questions then. Let's talk a little bit about Central Africa. You're based there now. Your job looks at what's going on with forest issues in Central Africa. What are you seeing there?
Well, a big forested land, as you may know, is the second largest tropical forest after the Amazon basin. A lot of the forest there has a lot of importance for the countries, economically speaking, because like in a country like Cameroon, it's the second foreign exchange earner after oil, right? So it really represents something like 10 to 13% of what you call GDP, gross domestic product. And in terms of livelihoods for people, the communities, it represents a lot, both in terms of formal and informal employment, but also in terms of subsistence. A lot of those things that people eat or medicine they use for, curing all kinds of illnesses is found in the forest. So for Central African people, forest is like part of their lives. So it represents a lot. And the challenge there is to make sure that the drive for economic development using, timber as a resource does not drive that resource to extinction. And of course, this opportunity now of these negotiations under the Climate Change Convention, when the role of forest in terms of contributing to reducing CO2 emissions in the atmosphere has come at the right time as yet one more incentive to preserve the forests of the Central African region.
So you've got people in Central Africa who, on one hand, rely on the forest for their lives, for the things they need in their day-to-day life. On the other hand, they can cut down. Some are cutting down the forest to earn money off of it. And just give a sense, when the forest is being cut down, why is that? Are they trying to sell the timber to someone in another country? Are they trying to use that land for something else?
Yeah, I would say basically three reasons. One is really for agricultural activities, because it's forest, and somehow people have also to make room for other crops, They tend to cut down the forest, usually doing what we call slash and burn, and then they plant crops, potatoes, cassavas, yams, you name it. And that's one of the major drivers of deforestation in that part of Africa. The second one is, of course, timber, as I said, for export or for domestic consumption. And the third one is infrastructure development, to build roads to link one province to another, or human settlements. As the population increases now, it's not what it was 40 or 50 years ago, obviously. And especially in the non-forested part of the country, you have a drive to come further south where the forests are. So forests disappear to make room for human settlement. Another problem in that part of the world, perhaps not so much in Cameroon, but because our office covers the whole of the Congo Basin, which is basically 6 countries, Cameroon, Gabon, Democratic Republic of Congo, the other Congo, Brazzaville, Equatorial Guinea, and Central African Republic. Those 6 constitute what we call the Congo Basin. So if you take a big country like Democratic Republic of Congo, I'm sure you are aware of all the conflicts that go on in that country, because it makes unfortunately headlines almost on a daily basis. So conflicts also are a major factor of deforestation, So those 3 reasons, plus a few other, minor ones. But still, with all that taken into account, the rate of deforestation in Central Africa is actually not as bad as you find in some other parts of the world, such as Southeast Asia or some parts of the Amazon basin. So there it's really more what we call forest degradation, when it's not clear cutting, which leaves the land bare to make room for some other activity, but rather some trees being cut down and then some other vegetation comes up. It's not the original composition of the primary forest, but you still have trees around. But still, it's not the same value in terms of the services that it can provide.